Hey guys, what's going on? It's Ben here. I am back again today doing another video. The subject of today's video is going to be again focusing on Game of Thrones. As I said in the previous video, I'm going to take a little break from the NBA and just focus on something else I'm interested in, which happens to be the show or book series if you read the books, Game of Thrones. The final season is coming back pretty soon here in the next couple of weeks, and I just felt like doing a couple of videos talking about the show or the books because I am just interested in the series overall. So in the first video, I did my top 10 favorite characters on the show. For this video, I'm going to be focusing on my top 10 least favorite characters on the show. So what that means is like number 10 number 1 will be the person I hate the most on the show, and number 10 will be the person I hate the 10th most. So in case you were wondering, is number 1 the worst or is number 1 the least bad? 1 is going to be the person I hate the most. How I determined this was a combination of how I feel about the character, how good I think the character is written, how interesting their parts of the show are, and then there are some where I dislike them just based on them being a bad person. But there are times where I feel like even if you're a bad person, like in the other list I had Tywin as one of my favorite characters. Although at his roots he might be a bad guy, he was super interesting and super fun to watch on screen, so that kind of compensated for him being bad. But there are some characters on my list for the worst 10 where they're just so incredibly bad that even if they're interesting, it doesn't really compensate for how evil they are, and I can't cheer for them. So without further ado, that's sort of an introduction, and here we go. So, topping off the list at number 10, starting us off, would be Cersei Lannister, who she's the one where it was really hard to put her on here, where she has done a lot of bad things on the show, but then again, she has been very entertaining too, and has had some of my favorite moments on the show, actually. So she just overall seems like a pretty evil character in that she's really only looking out for herself. You could argue Jaime, but then at times she's like cheated on Jaime and not really regarded him and kind of cast him aside when she found out he was missing a hand. You could say that she's doing all the things that she's doing for her children, but at times she's done things like killed Tommen's wife that really isn't something in favor of her child, killing her daughter-in-law and her actually her own uncle too at times. So you can't really say she's all about family when she killed her own uncle in that explosion in the end of season 6 in the High Sept. Um, other things that have put her on this list of me hating her was she was basically one of the driving forces behind Ned Stark ending up getting killed. No, she didn't do it. She just wanted him to be sent to the wall and removed his hand of the king. But she basically was the one that supported putting Joffrey in charge, and she's essentially the one that made sure that he became king instead of Ned being Lord Protector of the realm. So that is a pretty big offense in my book, considering Ned was up there as one of my favorite characters. And then just generally, she is a bit of a bitch to everybody on the show. Um, there's never any like sweet moments with Cersei. She's just like really cold-hearted and mean to everybody. Um, there are some times where you pity her, like in season 1 when you see Robert, he roughs her up quite a bit and hits her, and she says that it's a regular occurrence, and then you find out that she at one time actually loved Robert, and then he kind of cast her aside, and so she had this broken heart for a while. But then there's just some unredeemable qualities like that she practices incest is pretty hard to get over with her twin brother Jaime, and just things like she treats Tyrion really badly, who is one of the most universally loved characters on the show, and um, just basically, I think most people are a Lannister person or a Stark person. You're kind of supposed to cheer for the Starks during the whole show, and Cersei's kind of been like the main villain of the entire series, so to speak. From season 1 to present, she's always been one of the top villains, and because she hasn't died off yet, that almost makes her the main villain of the show. So I have her in here at number 10. She would be higher, but I can't put her any higher than this because she's just so entertaining. I don't think it's right to put her any higher. Number 9 on here, I have Arya Stark. That may come as a surprise to a lot of people, and I think there are some definitely redeeming qualities of Arya. There are times in the series where I would have put her maybe at number 3 or number 2 even, but she has had some redeeming parts. Okay, so reasons why I have her this low and not higher is because I thought that her scene at the start of season 7 was super badass, where she killed Walder Frey. I loved it. I also really liked the dynamic between her and the Hound, seasons 3 and 4. I found that really cool. They were probably the best like duo on the show that they've ever had. They were definitely like the odd couple of Game of Thrones, going around, very contrasting personalities, but they did really work well together. But now let me get into the reasons why I do not like Arya. So season 1, I think that the Syrio Forel sword lessons are pretty cool, but Arya comes off as really whiny to Ned a lot of the time, in my opinion. And she just, yes, she's trying to learn sword fighting, and it's noble that a woman is trying to take on a man's role in the world, and I get that whole dynamic, but I still, I still don't find her that cool, honestly. And she just comes off as naggy for the first season. Season 2, she kind of comes off the same way, except she's in uh, Harrenhal for some of the time, and she's with the Brotherhood Without Banners for some of the time, and she just still comes off as kind of this little kid who doesn't really have a purpose to the show, and she is just kind of whiny and going around. And when Gendry leaves, she just kind of whines to the Brotherhood and all that stuff. So as I say, seasons 3 and 4, I like her because she's with the Hound, and I found that dynamic really good. I don't like seasons 5 and 6 for her character arc. I think that the whole faceless men plotline was really slow and really didn't have any payoff besides them just being able to say, okay, Arya is trained now. But honestly, there was like no payoff to that storyline besides her killing Walder Frey, which that moment was really cool, but it wasn't worth just having her character sit over in Essos for 2 seasons, basically chasing her own tail and doing stupid tasks for Jaqen H'ghar. So I think that they really wasted her character for those 2 seasons, and that was really a time where they could have developed her in a really cool way, but it seems like they just didn't really know what to do, so they're like, okay, just go over here and run around this town and try and kill random people for no real reason. Season 7, I didn't really like her storyline in that I felt like the whole Littlefinger versus Arya thing was kind of um, just wasn't realistic, in that I think that Peter Baelish is like the smartest guy in all of Game of Thrones possibly, and for him to get outsmarted by Arya just because Arya's been at like spy school for 2 years doesn't really add up to me. I think they have Littlefinger make a lot of stupid mistakes during season 7 to just, and not to make him seem like he's getting dumber, but to try and make it seem like Arya's smarter. But I really don't think it's Arya being smart. I think it's Littlefinger making dumb mistakes because the writers are forcing him to. Okay, number 8 on here, I have Theon Greyjoy. Theon's a guy who he never really establishes like um, charisma or camaraderie with the audience. It's really like it's not. There's just really no connection to him. Like you get that he's this orphan kind of thing, and yes, you're supposed to feel a little bit bad for him, but then like right when you're kind of starting to turn and warm up to him, immediately he betrays the Starks, so you don't really end up warming up to him. And then the whole Reek storyline, it's all right, but I just feel like he's kind of devoid of development a bit, in that like yes, he snapped out of the Reek state of being around seasons 5 or 6, but we don't really ever get a reason why he decided to snap out of being Reek. It's just like, oh, one day he decides to, when for the past 3 years he hasn't, even though he could have at any time. Um, seasons 6 and 7, he hasn't really had much to do, and now he's trying to kind of defeat Euron Greyjoy, but honestly, at this point, it's kind of like, who cares? Like, nothing that he does will really impact the show that much in the grand scheme of things. So he's just unimportant, and for that reason, I don't really care too much about him. Moving on, number 7, I have Missandei, who is Daenerys's sort of like right hand woman and her best friend and confidant. So Missandei is a nice person and a good person, and it's not that she's evil by any stretch that I dislike her character. To me, it's that she's just not interesting. And the most interesting thing that's ever happened to her in the whole show is that she had sex with a guy that didn't have any, who was a eunuch in Grey Worm. I really don't like that whole buildup of her character is like to have sex with him over about 5 seasons at this point, and the only other purpose she exists is so that Daenerys can like dump her thoughts on the audience without having it awkwardly just be like Daenerys talking to the screen. They have to have some uh, a- uh, they have to have some way for Daenerys to be able to express what she's thinking so that the audience can know, and that's Missandei's whole purpose. So she's really a flat character. She never really develops at all. She's the same person she was at the beginning as she is now. Yes, she's a little bit more vocal, but that's just because Daenerys in season 3 was like, you should speak up more, but it's not really because she herself developed much. So that's why I don't like her character. It's not because she's a bad person, it's just because I find her somewhat boring. At number 6 on here, I have Brienne of Tarth. So Brienne is sort of like what I imagine grown-up Arya being, in that I get that certain TV shows, they do this thing where they present a character who they want you to like, and they write them in a certain way that they're trying to convince you to like the character. And I feel like that's what Brienne is, and it's just an annoying thing that I can pick up on. So there's examples in other shows too, but I think that Brienne is the best example for Game of Thrones, where initially you don't really have a reason to like her. Yes, she's a badass woman, which is cool and it's different, and it's something that no other character besides eventually Arya can offer the show. But um, she's not the best warrior in Westeros, I don't think. I think there's better. Um, and if you saw my last video, she tried to kill my favorite character on the show of all time in the Hound, so that made me seriously hate her for a while. And honestly, like she I don't know, just like a lot of the ways that they've written her character, it's like okay, so season 2 is when she gets introduced and she's really loyal to Renly Baratheon, who gets killed almost an episode or two after we get introduced to Brienne, who is super loyal to him. Then she transitions her allegiance to Catelyn Stark, who tells her to escort Jaime back to Westeros, or excuse me, back to King's Landing. And then Catelyn Stark dies right away, so then she basically doesn't have anyone to pledge herself to. But the whole purpose of her character is like to be a really loyal soldier to somebody and to pledge her sword to somebody. But the first two people she did it to got killed, so she really doesn't know what to do with herself. And I think as a result of that, the writers don't really know what to do with her, because they're like, okay, we got a badass warrior here, but everybody that she's been pledging herself to is dead, and the Stark girls don't really want to pledge themselves to her, or like they don't want her service. And that Sansa kind of is like, no thanks, I don't trust you. My mom got killed on your hands. And then Arya's like, I don't want to be around you when she tries to get Arya. And so I feel like that would be the perfect character to develop, and then eventually Brienne sort of gets a sense of mind that's like, I don't need to serve anybody. I can serve myself. I can be a strong, independent character who doesn't need to be serving somebody. I can be my own person. But they don't do that with her character. Brienne, when she starts the show, is the same Brienne we have in season 7. There is no character development. She's the same exact person. Yes, she maybe caught some feelings for Jaime, but that doesn't change anything about her. Brienne hasn't learned anything throughout the course of the show. She hasn't become a better or different person in any way. She's the exact same. For that reason, I find that she has been very boring. Moving on to number 5, I have Sansa Stark, who I think I just have had a prejudice against in season 1. Being in love with Joffrey is a really hard thing to come back from. I think that she's just really complainy and whiny, and I get that maybe you need that one character to be like that, but you sort of like you need a character who is a good person, technically technically a good person, but that you dislike, and I think that she's supposed to serve that purpose. I I just don't see any really redeemable qualities about her. Maybe in the later seasons, some people really like her and they think that she gets a lot more interesting and nice and uh, cool and all that. I don't really see it. Yes, I felt really bad when she got raped by Ramsay, and that's probably the most I've ever connected with her on the show, is really feeling sympathy for her during that time when she had to be under Ramsay. But like now, I feel like Jon is obviously the king of the North, and she isn't really. Um, I don't know. I feel like she could just die and nothing on the show would really change at this point, honestly. And I feel like if that's the case, that proves that the character isn't really that important, and by that stretch, isn't really that interesting, and by that stretch, isn't really that good. So that being said, I'm going to move on here. Number 4, Joffrey Baratheon, or really just a Lannister. He's just a giant jerk throughout the whole series he's on the show. He's really entitled. Season 1, Season 2, he's just a brat. Season 3, he's just a brat. Season 4, he dies in a really lame way. There's really, like, nothing good about Joffrey. He has a few funny moments, not because he himself is being funny, but because he'll say something kind of expecting to be cool or something, and then Tyrion will just totally knock him down. One of my favorite moments of the whole show is when Tyrion slaps Joffrey and says, "And now I've struck a king. Did my hand fall from my wrist?" That, I think, is one of the funniest moments on the show, and I think it just shows how entitled and arbitrary the title of king is, and how meaningless it really is, and that Joffrey thought he had all the control, but really Tywin was the one running things. Like, look at the major events that happened while Joffrey's king. They win the Battle of Blackwater Bay. Tyrion did that. They win the War of Five Kings because they kill Robb Stark. Tywin orchestrated that. And that's really the major things that happen in the country. All that Joffrey really uses his power for is to, number 1, kill Ned Stark, which he shouldn't have done and was a huge mistake. And number 2, like, torture people and, like, cut out a guy's tongue and stuff like that. So he really was like a bad king who didn't know how to rule whatsoever. And he just was a jerk and caused the death of one of my favorite characters, Ned Stark. So for that reason, I have him pretty high up here on my most hated characters list. Number 3, I have Ramsay Bolton, who actually to me is a super interesting character, but I just hated him. Even just just everything about him I hated, and how cruel he was. And I think although he was interesting, the writing was at times bad in that he was really one dimensional, and that it was like, I'm doing evil things for the sake of being evil. And just certain things, like, why did he really kill his dad? Like, there was no purpose to that. And when you think about it, like, yes, he got to be Lord Commander of Winterfell, or like he got to be Warden of the North technically for a little while, but they took away one of their main strategists, in that Roose was probably one of the best strategists of their whole contingent at that point. And then Roose was also kind of like the face of House Bolton that people like trusted, whereas Ramsay was just kind of like this lowly bastard that nobody really thought twice of. And so I think from that perspective, like, moves like that and like killing certain people never really made sense to me. And like the unnecessary torture of Theon just for like the sake of torturing Theon, there's no redeemable qualities about Ramsay. But the Battle of the Bastards was super entertaining. That was a great episode. When he takes on Stannis, that's a super interesting part of the show. So he did have interesting parts, and I was always curious about what he was up to. But his character was actually really flat throughout the whole course he was on the show, and for that reason, I wasn't a big fan. Okay, next, coming into the top 2, at number 2, I have Grey Worm. So this guy kind of checks all the boxes for me of good guy, but super uninteresting. He just seems like a really stock character, and yes, you might not even consider him one of the main characters on the show, as he doesn't really get many lines or much screen time, but he has been around the show since I think season 2 or season 3. And to me, he is just super uninteresting, super flat. He doesn't develop as a character at all whatsoever. You could say there's sort of like a love story between him and Missandei, but it's super uninteresting. And honestly, I think if you're telling the truth to yourself, I don't think anyone ever really cares about their love story. His personality is super flat. He occasionally makes some really dry humor jokes that almost sometimes seem unintentional. And I think it's not that he's a funny character. I think it's that, like, he doesn't pick up on social cues. So then, like, characters around him, like Tyrion, kind of make fun of him. But by proxy, it seems like Grey Worm is like making a joke, which he's not. Yeah, again, so the two major crimes here for him are uninteresting and no character development. And for those two reasons, I just get really bored every time he's on screen, and I'm just like wanting to get that over with. But rounding us out at number 1 is what I feel is like the worst character on the show, and that is Bran Stark. So is Bran Stark a good person? Yes. Does Bran Stark actually have some interesting moments on the show? Yes. Season 6 and 7, he's actually a somewhat interesting character. Does Bran Stark falling from the window actually launch a lot of the tension between the Starks and the Lannisters? Yes, it does. So Bran Stark is a necessary character for this show. But I will have to say, the only time I've ever fast forwarded through parts of Game of Thrones are whenever Bran Stark has been on screen seasons 2 through 4, because he's not in season 5. The character was so uninteresting they didn't include him in a season of the show, season 5. But either way, Bran is such a flat personality. He doesn't have any charisma. There's really no reason to like him. So season 6 and 7 are the only redeemable times. He does find out some interesting information about Jon Snow and Ned, and then season 7 he has some interesting intel that he can deliver, but he is just a jerk to Mira Reed when they get to Winterfell in season 7, and he says, like, I don't really care about you, even though you've been protecting me for like 5 years at this point. All these people like Hodor die along the way for Bran Stark, all for just Bran Stark, who is a guy who to me doesn't give you any reason to like him really, besides him being like a chosen one, so to speak. But I just don't see a reason to like him really, besides like his role in the show is interesting, but his specific character is very uninteresting and at times dislikable how entitled he can act actually, if you really think about it. So that's my list, the top 10 dislikable characters on Game of Thrones, going from 10 to 1 real quick. It's Cersei at 10, number 9 is Arya, 8 Theon, 7 Missandei, 6 Brienne, 5 Sansa, 4 Joffrey, 3 Ramsay, 2 is Grey Worm, and number 1, my least favorite character on Game of Thrones, is Bran Stark. Also, just a quick side note for Bran, he's given such a big part on the show for being such an uninteresting character. Like, if he got as much time as Grey Worm, he'd be a lot lower on the list, but because he gets as much screen time as he does, that put him at number 1 for me. Hope you guys enjoyed the video, hope you have a good day, and I'll see you next time. Bye.